Good morning, broadband professionals. Today is day one of our summer training summit. Today we have Riley Laheka and Mercedes Thomas. They'll be doing a presentation on 5G CBRS deployment. So before that, I'm going to go through a short deck here, and we're going to talk a little bit about the benefits of being SCTE / Golden Gate chapter member. For those members that are in the Golden Gate, might not be too many this time of day, but in case you or somebody you know misses this, it will repeat in 3 hours. So you can jump back on, or if you have a technical difficulty. The session is also being recorded, and I will be adding that to our on-demand library. So let's talk about SCTE membership, benefits of membership. One thing you do if you get a member, you get automatic chapter update. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm into the agenda. Excuse me. So what we're going to talk about this morning is benefits of membership, chapter updates, a new era in network intelligence. I'm sorry, that is incorrect. I'm sorry, I messed up on my PowerPoint. So let me go back. And then we'll do the introduction and presentation. So benefits of membership. Here's some primary benefits. We have online courses. We have a plethora of online courses, and you can only get those as a member. If you're not a member, you will not have access to those. You also have access to primers, lightning modules. And there are many other benefits I'm not going to cover this morning, but if you get onto the website, you can see what I'm talking about. And the other thing is networking. So members get lots of opportunities to network. We have our Vendors Day, we have our annual golf tournament, and there's also Cable Tech Expo. That's a big opportunity to network with many individuals in the industry. So let's talk a minute about chapter updates. Not only do we have the training summit, which starts today, and we have more training Tuesday, Wednesday, next Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So I do believe you probably have the announcement. I'm sorry I don't have those training sessions in front of me, but we will have at least 5 more days of training after today. So as far as the chapters, we have the following trainings coming up on 8/11, Threads of Tomorrow, Weaving Energy into Network of the Future. We have Critical Insight Plant Powering. We have Pro on 9/9, and then we have Proactive Ingress and Leakage Detection on 9/22. On 10/21, we have From Connectivity to Trust, Securing the Next Generation Cable Ecosystem. And not listed here, we also have our Fall Summit, which usually happens during the first week of December. So I'll take a minute here to do our introductions. Today's presenters are Riley Laheka and Mercedes Thomas. Sorry if I repeated that. So just a little bit about Riley. He's the Director of Product Management for Intersys Outside Plant Division. 7 years of experience with Intersys and 15 in product management. Holds an MBA from Western Washington University. And for Mercedes, she's a product manager too at Intersys. Manages the gateway product line, and supported the deployment of thousands of CBRS strand mount small cells. So with that, I'm going to end my slideshow, and we will get going here with let Mercedes take over. So Mercedes, I'm going to stop sharing. And if anyone has any questions, just add them to the chat. Me or Riley will try to read them out as they come in. So, and again, Riley and Mercedes, thanks so much for getting up so early to do this. For those on the East Coast, we're on the West Coast, so It's early for us, and I kind of stumbled through that, so I do apologize.
Thank you, Woody.
Mercedes?
Can everyone, Riley, can you see my screen okay? All right, perfect. I'll get started. So as Woody said, I'm Mercedes Thomas. I'm a product manager with Enersys, and then with me I have Riley Laheka, who's the director of product management. And today we're going to talk about 5G, CBRS, and access networks. So a quick look at the agenda. We're going to talk about some of the technical architecture and deployment framework around these HFC networks. We're going to look at the differences between small cells and macro towers and why MSOs are so interested in small cells, some of the location RF considerations that they need to look into for deployments, and then some of the background on powering and operations. And then, as Woody said, we're going to leave some time for questions at the end. All right, so jumping right in, I want to start out talking a little bit about why are we here today? Why are we taking your time this morning? Why is this topic so important? And we're in the middle of a pretty significant shift in how networks are being built and expanded. Customers are connecting more devices than ever, and they're expecting faster and more reliable service. And this is putting a lot of pressure on operators to add capacity and improve performance while also maintaining their costs. And what we've been seeing is that traditional approaches alone are just becoming harder to scale. It's driving a lot of interest in distributed network architectures. They're looking at how they can bring the network resources closer to the user so they can deliver better coverage, add higher capacity, and just a more consistent overall user experience. But with all of this large industry shift, it's really highlighting a lot of very exciting opportunities within this industry. It's having operators really evaluate what resources they have and how they can use them in new ways. And one of those big unique opportunities is how they can use their existing HFC network to support wireless growth without building out a lot of new infrastructure. Between 5G densification and rising mobile traffic demands, the market conditions are aligning right now to make this this transition very economically attractive. Small cells are providing a very practical way to support network growth and control deployment costs. And so that's what we're going to spend a lot of time on today is how do we leverage the HFC network to support the next phase of access evolution. So I'm going to go over some of the history of the CBRS auction and how this mid-band spectrum became available to operators. So not all spectrum is created equal. Each band has its own characteristics. So the high band, for example, offers massive data capacity, but has very limited range. So it can't penetrate through walls or foliage very easily. And you can see from the chart on the right-hand side here that the low band is really the opposite. It provides great range and penetration, but it suffers from limited bandwidth and slower speeds. The mid-band is really right in the middle of that. It's the balance between coverage and capacity. And this is why it's been nicknamed the Goldilocks spectrum. Not too high, not too low, but just right for dense 5G deployments. So in 2020, the FCC held a first of its kind auction where it made this mid-band spectrum available to some of the non-traditional players. And recognizing what a great opportunity this was, the cable operators took full advantage of it. And you can see on the screen that between the top three operators, they spent over $1 billion purchasing different parts of this spectrum. And those key cable operators that we're seeing here are Charter, Comcast, and Cox. You might also notice from their license counts, like Charter and Comcast actually spent very similar amounts of money, but they purchased very different amounts of licenses. And that's because the licenses also are not created equal. They're very dependent on the county and the spectrum block that you're purchasing. So you can kind of infer here that although Charter spent about the same amount, they purchased less licenses. And so they must have been spending them on very high value service areas. They concentrated on spending in dense cities, places like Seattle, Denver, Atlanta, where they're going to be able to offload more devices onto their network in a smaller geographical area. Comcast took a different approach. They actually have more counties, a larger geographical area, but it's less populated. So they spent less per license. And that's why you're seeing that difference. When we're partnering with our small cell vendors and the MSOs to deploy these devices, we're seeing them start out in like 5 or 6 markets and really test out devices, understand their metrics before they scale them to the rest of their network. So for Comcast, for example, we saw them deploy in places like Philly, Chicago, Denver, Pittsburgh to start out before they expanded on. Charter alone was trying to deploy in over 23 markets by the end of 2025. So they're really ramping up quickly and expanding where possible. So the CBRS spectrum framework is broken down into 3 tiers. The top tier is the incumbents, there's licensed users, and opportunistic access. This is all managed by a centralized system called SAS, or Spectrum Access System, which dynamically manages the spectrum and prevents interference. So small cells or other devices can connect to SAS to request and maintain spectrum use. So the top tier is the highest priority users. So these are things like the US Navy radars, existing satellite systems. This tier is fully protected from interference. The second tier is the priority access. So these are the people we were just talking about. These are the people that purchased spectrum rights through the auction, and they also receive protected access when the top tier is not in use. The third tier is the general authorized access. So these are shared access users that can utilize the spectrum when the other top 2 tiers are not occupying it. So no license is required. So these are things like municipalities, MSOs that didn't purchase during the auction their own block, venues, airports, things like that. And this centralized coordination really enables efficient spectrum reuse, and while it ensures that it also is compliant with regulatory requirements. The licensed shared access models provide a lot of flexibility and a wide range of deployment, so it makes it a very versatile tool for modern access networks.
So citizen band or citizen, the CBRS is citizen broadband, unlike the term I'm familiar with, which is citizens band. This is very different.
Yes, thank you for calling that out.
Yeah, okay. Just want to make sure everybody caught that. Citizens broadband.
Citizens broadband. So we talked a little bit about this investment that Charter and Comcast made in this auction, right? So what have they done with that money? Where are they at now? So Charter and Comcast both launched their mobile services in about 2017, 2018. And since then, they've added a combined 21 million lines to their mobile service offerings. So this is still one of their fastest growing products for both of these companies. Charter alone has gone from over 1 million users to over 11 million over those last like 6 or 7 years. Charter has offloaded over 87% of its traffic onto its own network, where Comcast is about 90%. So what we're seeing is that both of these companies are really fully taking advantage of this and offloading as much traffic as possible. And these numbers are only continuing to grow. This is relatively new infrastructure that they're deploying, and they're already making huge strides in it. But this is doing more than just creating a new business opportunity. It's really strengthening their business model and allows them to be looked at as a full service company. They're no longer just a broadband only provider, but they're able to offer wireless. And this bundle is really increasing customer retention, as it is really improving their customer stickiness, as they'd say, where you're fully invested in them across multiple services and really placing them as a central provider across different platforms. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the actual hardware architecture with small cells and macros. So macro towers are the backbone of the wide area wireless coverage. They play a very vital role in access networks. They provide broad geographical coverage through their highly elevated antenna placement and targeted sector coverage. So they're able to deliver consistent mobility and voice services across rural and suburban areas. You can really think of them as like the coverage anchors. They ensure continuity of service for users who are moving at speed or across large distances. But as you can imagine, with these large towers, they involve a lot of high capital and operating expenditures, right? There's permitting that they need to have. There's the obvious building and construction of these units, and then they're very costly to maintain. They also have capacity constraints in dense areas. A lot of users have to compete for those shared radio resources, so they're not optimized to address localized capacity demands. They're very much meant for those large rural areas to provide that broad geographical coverage, not necessarily meet the needs of high traffic areas. And that's where it brings us to small cells. Small cells provide that complementary layer to macro towers, so they're optimized for capacity over coverage. They operate at a much lower power and with much smaller coverage radii, so they're able to serve dense user populations easily. Their compact form factor also makes them easy to deploy. These devices are about 12 to 18 inches. You can see in the photos here, these are the Samsung and Nokia small cells. They're deployed on the Charter and Comcast networks in the Arizona area. And as you can see from the photos, they're hung directly on the HFC network. So they're, being able to deploy these with very little input from the city. They're able to access them whenever they need because they're using their own infrastructure that's already in place. So this allows them to scale as traffic patterns evolve or shift. They can easily go service these devices, move them to where is needed, or add additional small cells. So when these are combined with macro coverage, the small cells enable a layered network architecture. The macro towers ensure ubiquitous service, while the small cells deliver that localized performance that the customers are expecting from their operators. Both of these are needed to meet the modern application requirements. You can really see the difference. It really highlights the fundamental distinction between coverage-driven and capacity-driven network design. And modern networks heavily rely on both, right? They need to be looking at what is economically and technologically appropriate for that deployment. And so that's where we see that both of these devices are crucial to have when designing CBRS networks to make sure you can meet the diverse service requirements in an efficient way.
I do have a couple of questions and maybe a comment, or a question and a comment. Before I go any further, just a reminder to all the audience, you can just type your questions in chat. We'll be glad to read them out for you. But so just in summary, the large towers that you see out in rural areas, they're more about area coverage. You want to get like the maximum distance because there's just not that many users.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So one thing, so the limitation is capacity because you have one tower, one transponder, but you have a large area and hopefully not that many users, because if you do, you're going to run out of capacity right away.
Exactly. Yeah. And you're also sorry, go on.
And then when you go to the small cell, you're looking at a very specific area or a small area where you can pick up users. And are these placed like maybe places where there's a dead zones, or are they prioritized by potential utilization?
So right now in the applications we're seeing a lot of it based on utilization, right? Right now, the MSOs are looking to put as many users onto their own network and off of other companies like Verizon's network, for example. So they're looking to see like large cities, big areas where they can take those dense population and offload them. So that is something we're seeing. So you'll see these, the macro towers are also that high band, right? So they're going to have a hard time getting through cities with all the buildings and things like that. So the small cells are going to support being able to break that down and get reliable service to those areas.
And what's the advantage for the MSO to offload the traffic over?
So that's perfect leadway, Woody, because that's actually why we're what I'm going to send it right over to Riley to discuss. So that's perfect timing, actually.
Yeah, great question, Woody, and we'll dive a little deeper into that. So what does the MSO business case actually look like for small cells? Why are they choosing to go this route? As Mercedes already stated, the major MSOs spent over $1 billion on investment in the CBRS basically all of the 3.5 gigahertz spectrum that was allocated all across the US in the auction. Why did they spend that much money? Well, they knew that they were getting into mobile, and they did an extensive business case and found out that they could really surgically target the 3% footprint where about 60% of their traffic occurs, and then let the MNOs like Verizon handle the unprofitable long tail. So the areas that their users would go where they don't really need to have coverage because it's not as profitable. Another huge reason is the immense lower deployment capex by utilizing the HFC infrastructure that they already have in place. So that capex expenditure is estimated to be 40 to 60% less based on the HFC. What else does it get you is a very accelerated deployment timeline of about 6 to 12 months versus 18 to 36 months for macro towers. So there are many things that make this a much quicker deployment timeline. And then back to your question, Woody, they're strategically targeting the right place to put these small cells where they need a lot of capacity and they have a lot of their mobile users needing this coverage. Next slide.
So I got a question within that question. If you're not, let's just say you're not an MSO cell phone subscriber, let's just say you're Verizon or T-Mobile, whatever, and you connect through that small cell, are they having to pay the MSO a fee for that connection?
Yeah, if they decide to open that small cell up to the MNO, to Verizon, T-Mobile, someone else, yeah, it can work both ways if the cable operator decides to do that.
Okay, but that's a decision the cable operator makes. Okay.
Yeah, because it's their owned asset, right? It's their small cell. They paid for it, put it out on their network strategically, and primarily want to use it for their mobile user base first.
These do help address some interesting connection problems that I've experienced in the past, where you're like right in the middle of a big town or big city, or even where I live, and you think, oh, I've got to have excellent reception here, and you don't. It's like really terrible, and you go, wait a second, I'm right in the middle of this urban area or suburban area, and have like really poor signal. So I'm
Yes,
glad to see this, because I've noticed my reception has improved.
awesome. Yeah, there's absolutely dead zones out there everywhere. My neighborhood happens to be a dead zone, and it's a pretty well populated rural neighborhood. So they're still out there all over the place. So talking a bit about the technical capabilities in a little bit more detail, if you see the boxes on the lower right, you get predictable performance out of small cells. So when we're talking about latency, latency is basically halved from a macro perspective. So macro latency is 20 to 50 milliseconds, whereas for small cells, it drops down to 10 to 20 milliseconds. And what that does is it enables a lot of higher bandwidth and rich throughput applications off of that small cell. I already talked about permitting, but this is a massive advantage the operators have. Being able to deploy these easily, quickly, and having right-of-way access to the HFC is just critical. Mercedes already touched on power efficiency, but the scale here is immense, right? So macro towers, you're talking anywhere from 2 to 10 kilowatt requirement for power. These small cells Comcast and Charter have deployed are really only requiring about 100 watts of power. And this is actually power that they already typically have available on that specific section of the plant. So it's readily available power. And as we know, the power landscape is shifting rapidly with AI. They also have deployment flexibility. So a lot of people on this call and in SCTE, understand the HFC network, but most people out there don't. So the HFC network extends all the way across the US. There's actually over 1 million miles of HFC. And this allows the operators to deploy directly to the strand, but also, on a pole specifically, on a wall, on a rooftop, wherever their network is running, they can deploy this. And as I stated, it's huge that they have 24/7 right-of-way access to their assets anytime. Next slide. So Mercedes touched on, what type of cell sites and towers that there are out there. This is a nice graphic. If you look from right to left, there's about 154,000 cell towers out there in the US. You get about an additional 100,000 macro cell sites. So that macro cell site is a bit smaller than a traditional cell tower. If you happen to be in a city, you'll see these like on top of rooftops, just a bit smaller than a full-blown cell tower. And then there are almost 200,000 outdoor small cell nodes. And these are what we're talking about today. And these are what the operators are now deploying widely on their HFC network. What's actually driving the 5G growth and the continued deployment of these cell sites around the US? There's a lot of factors that go into it. Video streaming, cloud, remote work, when that started with COVID. And then obviously, got to mention AI. There's so much that's really driving this explosive mobile data growth. And I don't think anyone predicts it to slow down anytime soon. The other thing is that you're seeing is a transformation in the network where this explosive need for data is driving operators to put more intelligence out at the edge, closer to the end user. You're seeing that with AI compute. You're seeing it with DAA. A lot of changes to bring the intelligence closer to the user and make the latency less and improve the overall bandwidth performance. So just to put a number around that, in 2024, US cellular providers invested over $10 billion to expand their network capacity. So it's a huge investment. As I said, about 200,000 outdoor small cells in the US by the end of 2024. And looking towards the future, there's a 33% CAGR through 2030 for outdoor small cells. It's just a huge number of expected growth.
That is very, very large. And I have to say, this is one advantage of HFC has over an all fiber network is all fiber provider would really struggle with setting up small cells just because of the powering aspect.
Yes. Yep. It's a fantastic point, Woody, and it's a great reason to be able to continue to get more bang for your buck out of the existing HFC. Okay. All right, so next we're going to jump into some more details on location and RF considerations for these small cells. So this is, a bit of a wordy slide, but I'm going to take you through a little more detail on some of what we've already touched on. I want to talk about what the site selection factors look like, how the MSOs do their RF planning, and the knowledge that they have to do this in the first place. So starting at the upper left there, as we stated, the MSOs know the architecture of their plant down to a level of detail that's pretty impressive. So they know, in these residential clusters or commercial districts where it makes sense to spend the capex to deploy this small cell and then to generate the opex over time to pay for the small cell and go past it. So they can really target the exact areas. And it's really in only those areas of the 10 to 13%. Because as Mercedes touched on, Comcast has 90% of its traffic running over its Wi-Fi network, and Charter has 87. So they can be real strategic about where to put these to make it worthwhile. So next, they're really going to look at what mounting assets do they have in that specific location they want to put a small cell, structural suitability, accessibility, and then something that's not really as big for the small cells is the aesthetic appeal. Most people drive by the HFC network all day long, and if you ask them to pick out a small cell, they would have no idea what it looks like. It is more important, let's say they have a business customer and the business customer doesn't want small cells hanging around their business. They have to consider it. The RF environment is crucial. When we were designing and developing our piece of this solution, we had to do extensive testing and engineering to make sure that we weren't emitting RF emissions onto the HFC, and that vice versa, we weren't pulling in interference into the small cell. And so this is crucial, and the operators understand this very well, and they're going to assess the RF environment where they're putting the small cell and make sure that it's a clean environment. They have to check that they have the bandwidth available in that segment of the plant. So they have to make sure, if they're placing a power passing tap, they need to know that when they deploy this small cell, they're going to have enough bandwidth coming from the CMTS to support the throughput planned for that radio in that space and all of the users who are going to potentially connect to it. I talked about permitting. I want to talk a little bit more about power. So typically, operators deploy a segment of the plant and they target around 80% utilization of the power. So as an example, if they were deploying or had deployed a 15 amp power supply and the actives along with the resistance loss was equaling 10 amps of load, they would have roughly 5 amps of headroom. What that could mean is that they could put 2 small cells, which pull, about 1 to 2 amps a piece. Obviously, that wouldn't give them much remaining headroom. Maybe they just decide to deploy 1 small cell on that segment of the plant and still have a bit of headroom to play with. But again, as Woody stated, they have the power and they can utilize it in any way that they want. It's essentially their network. They're going to do a study on propagation and line of sight. As Mercedes said, the 3.5 to 3.75 gigahertz spectrum is the Goldilocks zone. So they can get the high throughput, but also, a better range than the high band. So they're going to make sure that they put it in the right place where it can hit the maximum amount of their users when they leave their residence. And then I already touched on RF interference. They're definitely going to look at other sources of RF interference that could interfere with the small cell they're going to place. Next slide.
I would just like to remind the audience that one thing that might be a bit of a misconception is that even though the frequencies of the cell tower is utilizing it, that power can actually enter the cable plant network or the HFC network and can wreak havoc. We've had situations where cell towers have interfered with cable modems, but they also can interfere with your lasers in your in receivers in your nodes, especially when you go to full duplex DOCSIS, so you have traffic going both ways. However, it just reminds us that we have to keep our plant tight, so that if there's any place where signal's getting in, it can cause a problem. So don't assume that just because it's outside the frequency range of what you're utilizing on the plant that it won't cause a problem.
Yes, vitally important, and thanks for sharing that, Woody. So last segment of the presentation, we're going to get into some more details on powering and operations. So this is kind of bringing this full circle. As I stated, most of you on the call and involved with SCTE should know quite a bit about the HFC network or the communications network in general. But we wanted to give you a picture of it, to paint the picture in your head. As I stated earlier, there are over 1 million miles of HFC deployed widely across the US. If you look at the picture on the bottom, and you walk through your neighborhood or you drive along the road and you see the telephone poles, when you look up, the first segment is the communications network. It hangs at the bottom of the telephone pole. If you keep looking for long enough, you will spot a gray box. It will say alpha on it typically. And inside that gray box is the picture in the upper middle. And so it's going to have a power supply in the top, and then typically it's going to have batteries in the bottom of the cabinet. The batteries are used for energy storage backup. So what that means is that when the utility goes down, these batteries pick up the load, and they're going to back up that network for, as long as they have energy storage left based on the load of the plant. But this is a really unique advantage to the HFC network that doesn't really exist in almost any other network out there, in that it can continue to run long after the utility power is out. What does that do for small cells? It means that they can potentially still be on while the power is out. And that's crucial for emergency situations, first responders, communications when the utility goes out. So if you follow the red line, so running from the power supply, and the power can run in either direction, the next thing we have to the right is actually the small cell. So again, that's a picture of the Samsung CBRS 5G stream out small cell. The piece that we have to that is the integrated DOCSIS 3.1 outdoor hardened cable modem. So that goes in the front end of the small cell, and that provides the communications and the power path and power cleanup. As you go further right, this HFC network could also be providing power and backhaul to things like Wi-Fi access points, to security cameras. Really, there's tons of applications out there. One of the biggest pickups we've seen recently is powering and backhauling for outdoor access points at one of the major MSOs. Next slide. So wanted to get into a little more detail and give you guys some examples of some of the new systems that are out there. Again, the powering and operations advantage of the HFC network is critical. Again, as I stated, these backed up small cells remain operational during outages. You can still have service continuity, coverage in critical scenarios, and this acts as a real competitive differentiation for the MSO's networks versus a small cell that Woody mentioned, which could be powered off of line power. And if it's powered off of line power, when the line power goes out, the small cell goes out. I talked. Oh, go ahead, Woody.
Yeah, another question. I noticed that many of the cell operators actually install transponders on light pole, actually light poles, city lights poles, and they also put a vault at the bottom of that installation, or at the bottom of the pole. Are, do they have a battery backup, or they just go off when local power goes out?
Yeah, great question. I think it depends on, the application and that specific scenario. I think sometimes they might be battery backed up if it's a critical, location, but I think oftentimes they're not, Woody.
Yeah, I mean, I see hundreds of these installations. It's surprising that they do, but my reception here is at home is still pretty poor, and so question, and this might be another question for Mercedes, because I noticed she was into gateway the gate home, or the gateway product line. Is have you seen any move with operators to moving to utilizing the home gateway to connect to offload cell phone traffic?
I haven't seen that application at all. Mercedes, have you heard of anything like that?
No, I haven't either.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, not as of yet, Woody. Um, so getting back into the backup, so typically at these sites, operators have from 4 to 8 hours of backup time. The examples to the right are extreme cases. So for the CPUC, which stands for California Public Utility Commission, with the onset of wildfires, about 6-ish years ago, they created a mandate and they required at these high threat fire districts in Northern California, they required 72 hours of backup. So just a staggering amount of backup. And this was really to support emergency communications in these areas, and especially when the utility saw wind events, and so they cut the power. These systems are come online, and provide that 72 hours of backup. So they can either be TPPL, which is thin plate pure lead, or they can be lithium, which is the lower right hand picture. And these systems have been operational in those areas for years now, and have gone through a lot of events where they have been proven to provide 72 hours of backup. So to tie this back into the small cell, if there happened to be a small cell on that segment of the plant, that thing's going to be operational for 72 hours, which is pretty staggering. Next slide. All right, so this is my final slide. I'm going to wrap it up, and then we'll leave the last bit of time here for any questions you guys have. What do we feel like is next in the evolution of CBRS, and specifically small cell networks? We think that we're going to continue to see network densification. We continue to see the growth of small cells accelerate as operators push capacity closer and closer to the end users, and that they need to support their continued mobile data growth. As the operators talk about in almost all their earnings calls as of late, this is a high growth area for them, and is just an excellent area for them to play and to win. We're going to see continued expansion of MSO-owned mobile infrastructure. Again, as Mercedes talked about, and I touched on in the business case, the more the MSOs can put these small cells out and keep their own traffic on their network, the less they have to pay, per gig to Verizon. So it's a business case play, and it works really well for them. And now they can own this piece of the network that they haven't owned before. CBRS is causing this shift toward private networks and various enterprise use cases. I've read a lot of interesting articles on how people are using CBRS for private networks, whether it be automation, robotics, AI. But it's really interesting how they're using this spectrum to create their own network and use it as a kind of high bandwidth, but also longer reach play in their own large campus. It's a pretty exciting time to be in HFC power and battery. We're seeing more advancements more quickly in battery chemistry. Obviously, lithium has been a huge one, but we're seeing other chemistries come out and play in the broadband space. And what they do basically is enable a longer runtime with a smaller footprint. They add resiliency, and they kind of take down the need of PNM or proactive network maintenance for a typical TPPL or lead acid solution. Woody touched on this, but the HFC network is evolving as we're all aware. So extended spectrum DOCSIS as well as full duplex DOCSIS. We're just continuing to see this network grow and evolve, and it's not done yet. And then lastly, increased automation and network intelligence. AI is driving an ability to optimize and control and understand their network like never before. We're building AI into some really interesting applications with our next gen power supply. And it's just going to make these networks get smarter and more resilient. So just leave you with a quote from Mike Kavanaugh on a recent 2026 earnings call. Wireless is a central lever in our convergence strategy. It increases engagement, reduces churn, and strengthens customer lifetime value. So the MSOs are committed; they're full in to wireless, and it's a fun to be a part of it. Thanks, Woody. I'll hand it back over to you.
Yes, and just to the audience, if you have any questions, just put them in the chat. We'll take them now and try to do our best to address them. If there are no questions, I'm going to pull up my. If you would, let's see if I can share my screen. I kind of messed up on. Hang on a second. On my PowerPoint a while ago, so I just wanted to share with everybody the rest of the upcoming training for this summer summit. So I know what I'm doing wrong. And hopefully you guys have a question for us. But today's day one, which is Tuesday. So again, we'll have the CBRS deployment in about, we'll repeat it in about 3 hours. And then tomorrow we'll have back to basics technical monograms. And on Thursday, understanding outside plant powering. Day 4, which will be Tuesday, a week from today, we'll have fiber math. And day 5, extended spectrum DOCSIS testing and validation. And day 6, we're going to do drop, bury, and cable damage prevention. So I apologize for not having that ready the first time. I forgot to add it. So I'm going to get out of here and see if there are any questions. I'm not seeing any questions, folks, but I'd just like to say thank you for Jeff and Mercedes for getting up so early here on the West Coast to do this and for repeating it. And thank you for the audience to join you, and look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Woody.